Before we begin the 7th episode of Marco Polo, an apology to patron David Spoffeth. David very helpfully pointed out to me after I'd published episode 4, Wall of Lies, that episode contained the answer to a mystery we currently are unable to solve about Marco Polo and Doctor Who in general. So I address that in this episode because these episodes are lucky enough that I'm so close to the wire with my release dates that I released episode 4 before I'd recorded episode 6. So this is how close it's like Terminus in the studio all over again. It's the last minute, and David pointed out that Wall of Lies has the answer to a mystery. So I talk about that in this episode because I didn't talk about it in episode 4. I was too busy talking about Cups and the character actor Sidney Bromley because I'm a hopeless idiot. And to compound my hopeless idiocy, I have been talking to another patron because that's one of the advantages of Patreon. So do go there, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, because we have back and forth. So I've been talking to another David about David Gillespie about fluffs in the Avengers, which David is educating me are legion and rather exciting, and I might go, when I get a spare minute, go back and look at some. I'd remembered some Blinking Eyes. He says that one's quite famous, but there are other fluffs in the Avengers in comparison to Doctor Who. You know, the fluffs are not unique to Doctor Who is how this came about. So we were having that chat. So then when I was talking about my mistake, or the absence of comment in Wall of Lies about its unique potential to solve a Doctor Who mystery, in what you're about to hear, which is recorded in the past for me recording this now, but in the future in terms of what you're listening to, I credit David Gillespie, not David Spoffeth, with pointing out the Wall of Lies absence. So I'm addressing that here and also plugging my Patreon page, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. But I hope you enjoy this, especially the two Davids. Welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined, but often ineptly put together Doctor Who episode commentary podcast, marshalled by me, Toby Hadoke, in which I try to guess what my special guests' favourite things are about the Doctor Who story of their choice.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Bentham. I'm very pleased to nominate as my Doctor Who story for Toby's enterprise, Marco Polo.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to this commentary for Marco Polo, in which I am ably assisted and prompted and inspired by Doctor Who fan of yore, Jeremy Bentham, who wrote the marvellous Doctor Who, the Early Years book, a repository of some of the most spellbinding and awe-inspiring pictures from early Who, that was a Christmas treasure trove for me when I was a time tot. So Jeremy has been very methodically assessing the various qualities provided by Marco Polo, where I've been a bit more scatterbrained, but that is the nature of these things. So I hope you've been enjoying, if like me, sort of rather discovering a story. As I say, I'd experienced a couple of times only, but certainly don't know as well as, somewhere it's just much easier to, pop a DVD or in the old days a VHS into the machine and watch over and over again. And we've got to episode 6. So let's see what that has to offer. I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. So a couple of things to note. Something I didn't talk about with episode 4, the one that we don't have telesnaps for, is that we have a Doctor Who mystery there, of course. And thanks to various of my patrons, I think it was David Gillespie, who's a great correspondent on my Patreon page, for pointing out that there was something I could have talked about instead of my Where's Wally Cup, which Cup fans, Michael Dennis is one of the leading Cup aficionados in Hadokesville patron. The Where's Wally mug is chipped on the bottom, but otherwise seems structurally sound. Mighty Kublai Khan is this episode of Marco Polo, and the episode title looks to have been superimposed on a shot of the top of the TARDIS, which is rather lovely. I love the fact that this scene takes place at night. It's really atmospheric, and as I say, we know that shot of Tigana with his arm around Susan's neck, and Ian comes out to confront him, and of course, you really believe this bloodthirsty time, and that Tigana would quite happily dispatch Susan. And it's nice that the Doctor, Ian does the initial moment of confrontation, but the Doctor comes out sort of as the figure of authority right at the end, and he's quite stern. I find Hartnell's performance in this very interesting. It's not quite like his performance in some other stories, I would say. But look, episode 4 I started talking about, and David Gillespie, who pointed out on my Twitter that it is the source of one mystery that we cannot currently, with the resources we have available, solve. And that is, this is one that I'm sure it will appeal to all fans of Doctor Who, is when, because if you look at the closing titles of this episode, Mighty Kublai Khan and indeed the episode before, the cast list, font and credits are centre aligned, however you describe it, whereas for episodes 1 to 3 they are left justified. So the writing errs to the left, and the last left justified that we can see with photographic evidence is the closing titles of episode 3, and the first centre justified is in the closing titles to episode 5. So did the justification change? Did John Crockett come in and change it, and then that just continued to be the way? Or was that just a coincidence, and that John Crockett's episode was the last with the left justified? Until we get off-screen stills from Wall of Lies or the episodes themselves, we will never know. And I like the fact that we have that little mystery. And it's one of those nice mysteries that actually nobody, there are always some mysteries where people have a theory and then people argue and go, meh, meh. Whereas this is one where we just simply don't know. There is not one thing that is more likely than the other, because often there were plans with these sorts of things and habits formed, and did anybody really sort of sit down and go, do you know what, Doctor Who, we're nearly there with Doctor Who, but the alignment of the closing credits is it's simply that the show dies for me if it stays left justified. I love this scene between Ian and Marco, two decent men having a face-off, and Ian, come episode 6, I think I alluded to this before, and was talking over a sort of similar scene where they have to establish trust in an earlier episode. But here, they've been through so much. They've been travelling companions who've endured much, but enjoyed friendship and all of that. And Ian comes out, he trusts Marco. And I like the fact that Marco is not, the primitive the Doctor describes him as, because the Doctor is wrong. But that Ian can trust Marco and say, look, it's a time machine. Please give it back. But Ian is caught out in his own wall of lies, because he has been dishonest with Marco before. And actually at this juncture, because of course they've lied to protect Ping Cho, which I like as well. I love these layers of white lying, as we would call it. Which, it looked heroic when Ian covered for Ping Cho there. But of course, Marco's not daft, and I like the fact that Marco is never allowed to be stupid. And Marco goes, well, I know that you were lying to cover Ping Cho. But so I know you're capable of lying. Now, of course, I mean, this is how we conduct ourselves in Twitter now, because somebody, the idea that somebody is capable of lying about something trivial means they'll lie about something. We've always done it in politics. Somebody lies to their wife by having an affair with their secretary. That means they'd lie to the population. I think that's an extremely daft parallel to draw. I mean, if you're out there, if anyone listening to this has never lied under any circumstances, well, I take my hat off to you. I've lied in all sorts of circumstances, but I like to think that were it to be something of real import and principle, I like to think I wouldn't lie. But of course, sometimes we lie to ourselves as well. Interesting. Anyway, I like the way that it is used in this drama, and Marco makes a perfectly reasonable point. You lied about Ping Cho, so I'm not going to believe your claim you're from another time. Well, as I say, I think that is reasonable, and that is the reason, not that Marco goes, "Oh, I'm from the olden days and thick and can't conceive of such a thing." I also love the last line where he goes, "And if I did believe you, you'd have the key." I find that actually very moving and very, decent, empathic character writing. Also, though, what's interesting is that we are expected to believe that, that Marco saw, cups full of wine move from Tibetan monks' tables to mouths, or whatever it is he said. There is some magic that he talks about, and we're never asked to question that. Now, in the world of Doctor Who as we understand it now, we don't really have magic Tibetan monks. I mean, there is occasionally telekinesis in Doctor Who, I suppose, but I don't know. I find that stretches my credulity, because it's magic within the real world, if you like, more than I do other things. I would prefer to forget the idea that in the Doctor Who universe, magic monks are considered a real thing, even if by somebody from 700 years ago or whatever, because he's saying that he saw it. So are we supposed to believe there are magic monks? But then again, we've had people levitate stuff with their mind in other Doctor Who. So, in fact, I have double standards there. That's interesting. And until I started going, but we don't believe in magic monks. I'd actually forgotten all the areas where we do have telekinesis in Doctor Who, and they only came into my head as I was talking about them. So we make a universe of our own rules, and those rules have inconsistencies. Now, Gabor Baraka, Wang Lo, here he is, and Kuitju Tatilenko. Now, I mentioned that Tatilenko is unfortunate in that none of his episodes of Doctor Who exist. Gabor Baraka is the same, because he returns in The Crusade, but only in episode 2, which no longer exists. And Zora Segal, who is also in this, but as a non-speaking artist, but has a speaking part in The Crusade, but only in episode 2. So actually all three of them are unfortunate in that none of their episodes of Doctor Who exist. So in fact, I'm sure if you would like to be one of those people, you could go on Twitter and say that missing episodes are actually inherently problematic because of their racism, because Gabor Baraka was Hungarian, Tatilenko was, I think he was born in Norway, but some things I've read say he was Swedish. So he's a Scandinavian Jew and an Indian actress have all been who've appeared in more than one Doctor Who story, because obviously we have Zelia Merton in this as well, and Basil Tang and those various actors. But multi-story appearing Doctor Who actors from other countries and other cultures and backgrounds have all been wiped by the missing episode purge. So you heard it here first. Pamela Nash and the BBC purging people were all systematically, structurally racist or something, whatever you want to do there. Yes, but I like Gabor Baraka. He has a great time of being sort of very sort of Kempley remonstrating. I think his would be an enjoyable performance. Could we see it? Silly child. Oh, bless. And we've got loads of photos of this as well, but they're all largely from the side of poor old Gabor Baraka. But there's a telesnap full on. Oh, aren't we so lucky to have this glorious. You can't refer to the telesnaps online, of course, because they were in Waris Hussein's private collection. So I'm not even as familiar with those as I am with some of the ones that in the early days of the internet and the Doctor Who website I would patiently flick through because Basil Tang. Basil Tang, who plays Office Foreman, who gives one of the most muted performances in the whole of Doctor Who. He was also the sort of check-in point. I wouldn't be so bold as to say agent, because I don't know and I don't think so. But he was certainly the contact for a lot of the extras that they use in later episodes that were... So some are from the so-called Peggy Sir's Oriental casting agency, but other supporting artists of that kind were Basil Tang was the person that you contacted to give the call times or to, as the point of contact for some of the ones in the later episodes. So he was more than just a not very good actor. He was also a sort of way station, if you like, between the production office and those performers. Basil Tang returns uncredited in later Doctor Who stories, including he's the Chinese delegate in Day of the Daleks. Yes, Basil Tang. There we are. And I like the drama between all of the people. A lot of this is people talking in rooms, and some of it quite long scenes. I mean, that scene between Marco and Ian was very long, but I thought it was absolutely lovely. And what seemed like window dressing. It's interesting. I've been going through a lot of the newspaper stuff because I'm doing a sister podcast to this, Too Much Information. And a lot of the early newspaper sort of synopsis say, Doctor Who meets Marco Polo, and there is also a Chinese girl who's going to get married to an old man. And I never really considered Ping Cho's subplot as being particularly important. It was a reason for her being there and having a friend to Susan. But actually, of course, when the story needs a couple of extra episodes, actually that being seeded in as early as it is very helpful, because the reason Ian is now away and finds the TARDIS is because he's gone looking for Ping Cho, who's run away because she doesn't want to marry the guy. Also, that's the key issue as well. But it means that story impacts on the regular story. It's not just sort of side dressing, to have a little bit of a subplot for a character, a one-off character. It does actually impact on the movements of the main plot as we get towards our destination and need our main characters sort of split off and indeed going about the important business of finding the TARDIS. I like the way that Barbara fronts off to Tigana, and actually I've sort of taken the mickey thanks to Kieran Hodgson's brilliant, I am not suspicious at all. He's actually comes across as very reasonable in these scenes. He is a plausible force. You can actually see why Marco will take him at his word. And that Marco is a good man, but he defers to the hierarchy of the time, which is if Kublai Khan says something, you damn well do it. And and if you didn't, you were probably in an awful lot of trouble. So although Marco is a good guy, he's not going to do anything that's going to get him into trouble. I love the look of these costumes. I love to see these performances, and I think these scenes have enough dramatic meat. And are well enough written. The dialogue is very good. Sometimes lots of people in a room arguing in Doctor Who isn't necessarily that compelling. But I think the dialogue of John Lucarotti is superior, and we know that Waris Hussein, if the way that he shoots the cave people is any example, is that he knows how to favour the actors and give us an insight into their thoughts as well as what they're saying. So there's a lot more going on than the dialogue and the vocal performances. So I would be. I sometimes think with Marco Polo, is it so over familiar visually because we've got so many pictures that should we not be asking for other episodes? I know it doesn't matter which episodes we ask for to come back, but I would usually say, my 3 I want back would be Mythmakers, Massacre, and Marco, the 3 M's, even though Troughton is my favourite Doctor. But is that me going, it's because we've got, no moving pictures from any of them, really. And is it, or is it because Marco Polo is 7 episodes, so you get more? Now, Clive Doig, the vision mixer, always says that there was a camera movement in the palace of Kublai Khan where the camera sort of sweeps in for this entrance and somebody knocks a pillar or a column over and it wobbles and falls over, and Clive was amazed that it stayed in. Now, we will never know unless we get the episode. I suspect, history and yarn telling have probably exaggerated that, but there may have been, a noticeable set wobble, say, or a camera, crashing into something slightly. We have cameras crashing into stuff, don't we, on some existing episodes? I think if the whole set had collapsed, as Clive sometimes tells it, they would have done it again. I like the Vizier who just keeps telling them to kowtow. It's quite funny, and of course this is where the story. I mean, Wang Lo is quite funny, and there's certain amounts of wit in the dialogue and in the exchanges, and particularly the characterization of the Doctor. But I think it is in Mighty Kublai Khan that John Lucarotti goes, right, we can really have fun now. And he said it was because in the Canadian radio series that he'd written Kublai Khan as this, mighty warlord character, as he is so often depicted. The actor had decided to play him as a sort of doddery, eccentric, knackered old thing. And so when he came to do his Doctor Who, he remembered that, sadly nameless now, actor, and wrote that performance into the characterization of his Doctor Who, Kublai Khan. So you have this mighty wheeze, this wonderful gag, and there's a brilliant picture here of everybody's arses as they all do their kowtowing, except for Hartnell, who sort of has to stay straight up because he's got the gout. I do sort of like it when the Doctor is this sort of this person slightly removed from the reality of the situation because he's worried about his back. And it's really interesting, isn't it, that how different writers respond to the brief and how they think the Doctor's role should be in it. And here the Doctor is sort of almost unaware of the wider threat, even though an intelligent time traveller would know that Kublai Khan is very powerful because he's so worried about his back. But in so doing, being so ignorant of that sort of protocol and consumed in his own sciatica and gout or whatever, that he then endears himself to a similarly afflicted old man, but not doing a Pertwee and going, my life at your command, and knowing how to do the right salute, and some would say sucking up to authority. I actually quite like the fact that Pertwee knows how to do things the proper way, but I also understand that that's sort of at odds with those who like their Doctor to be an anarchist. I'm one of those terrible mixtures of both, is that I believe in the revolution, but I think it should be achieved by a correctly phrased letter to the editor of the Times. There was but yes, this idea that the Doctor's so worried about his back that he endears himself to the Khan, and the comedy idea that the Khan is this, and Martin Miller's tiny, isn't he, and wizened, and it's a convincing makeup. Again, you wouldn't do it now, but he's got long fingernails and everything. And of course, Martin Miller was a Czechoslovakian Jew who'd escaped the Holocaust, and like many people of his kind from all over the world, was welcomed into the British theatrical profession, a very welcoming place. And I've read interviews and indeed conducted interviews with many actors from that time, and is it Stephen Bourne who went to the trouble of interviewing a lot of black performers from that time who found themselves very welcomed into the theatrical profession, and even though they, a lot of the times the parts that would now go to would rightly now no question only go to actors of the correct the correct nationality, or the genuine article, as it were given to actors like Martin Miller, because acting under heavy makeup was part of what character actors did. Yes, things have changed and improved, but let's not write off Czechoslovakian Jew escaping from Hitler, Martin Miller, as one of the one of the perpetrators of some awful racist slight against East Asian performers, because he was taking part in the theatrical tradition of heavily made up character actors doing that kind of thing, which was the norm at the time. As I say, it's not a call to return to those times, but I think it's just a reminder that pointing at them and just going, well, that's just racist, is devoid of context and a keenness to scold that I find a bit tiresome. Whilst celebrating the fact that we have improved the way we do such things, although there is also still improvement of representation that needs to continue. And I've probably overemphasised that now, but one sometimes needs to. The paint, even on these pictures, the paintings outside the window of Kublai Khan's palace are obvious paintings. But again, that was, it was a suggestion of what is outside, and the audience at home who are used to watching theatres with painted backdrops know that it is a suggestion. There's no attempt at photorealism, and they could have gone for that if they'd had the budget or wanted to or thought it was a priority, but it was enough to go, well, we'll just have a painted psych outside the window and the audience will go with it, and those that don't, well, that's you, isn't it? If you watch an exciting piece of drama with good acting and good writing, and you come away going, but I think you'll find that curtain outside the window is painted, then I'm very happy for you, but I'm not mightily interested in having a conversation with you. It's like going, it's a beautiful sunny day, isn't it? Yeah, but I mean, all that is this great big orange orb in a sky that's been giving heat and light to the planet for as long as it lives. I mean, that's all it is, mate. I mean, well, anyone could do that. Tutti Lemko. I do wish we could see some of his. He was a famous dancer, and of course was in Fiddler on the Roof. And here we have another Tigana flavoured cliffhanger. And of course, this is another one where our standards and our mores and the ways that we do things are put to the test. Ian goes, all right, I'll kill him. Now, we know that's a bluff because Ian would never kill him. And Tigana beautifully would and doesn't give a monkeys and goes, all right, then kill him. And you go, okay, that's not going to work. And then he just has to quietly say, come. And it's brilliant. It's a real contrast to some often, kill them now, or big explosive, cliffhangers. It's a much more leisurely and becalmed kind of, I've got I am not worried about you in the slightest. He's a great villain. And again, all those great character dynamics that make this story such a beautiful, beautiful thing that I do miss. I miss more from having experienced it in this way, where I'm having to give it a little bit more scrutiny and sort of understand it a little bit more. I definitely feel, well, we'll talk about it in part 7. where it stands in the whole of the pantheon of season 1 and Hartnell as a whole and the 60s as a whole. I think it's an important story. I think it's a high-end literate script. It's a high-end worthy production, and obviously the design of costume and sets looks incredible. Pretty faultless cast, apart from maybe Basil Tang mumbling his way in. But not a white character actor under heavy makeup, so you go that there's so that's a price worth paying in a way. That they went, well, let's try and get some of the real deal in, even though there are a limited number at our disposal. But then the idea that you would say, well, Basil Tang should play Tigana or Kublai Khan is I think wishful thinking. Right. I bang that drum quite a lot. Sorry. Not because I've said it all. You can I'm sure somebody could mischaracterize this if they wanted to, but please don't, because I'm not saying the bad thing you could say that I'm saying. Right. I'm going to choose. I think I'm going to choose the comedy. I'm going to choose the fact that and it's an important element of Doctor Who. And I think we often talk of the arrival of Dennis Spooner as the time when Doctor Who realised that comedy was an essential part of its DNA. He certainly was very good at synthesising the comedic aspects of the programme with the more dramatic and all of the other stuff that was already in place, and people talk of the Romans as being an out and out comedy and perhaps a mistake, and it that needed reining in a little bit. I love the Romans, but I know the production team at the time thought maybe we've gone a little bit too far of going for pure comedy here. There's plenty of the Romans that isn't funny and deliberately not funny, but where it's funny it really goes for the funny, doesn't it? But actually I would say there's and unlike the Aztecs, which Lucarotti does later, he really ladles in the comedy here, specifically with that characterization of Kublai Khan. Although Wang Lo is quite funny too, but I think some of that is Gabor Baraka being, to use Clive Merrison's description of his own acting, and I think it's a nice way of describing a particular kind of acting as vivid, very vivid. I like that. I think Gabor Baraka and Tati Lemko are both vivid performers. But Martin Miller's characterization and the way that Kublai Khan is scripted is a deliberate bit of bathos. It's a deliberate bit of sort of building up this great all powerful figure, and then the gag is he's a guy with gout shuffling in and being all grumpy about it, and then that helps the story because that's how he bonds with the Doctor, and we have the ingenious setup for next week, which we'll talk about next week, of where the Doctor trying to win the TARDIS back, which is delightful and again beautifully done. So I think the introduction of comedy at this point, comedy becomes I think Doctor Who, an essential ingredient of Doctor Who is its wit. And sometimes it goes too far with the comedy, and sometimes it tries to be too serious. But I think at its best, it is when it goes about its business very seriously, but with the wit of its performers and its writers intact. And I think that is what happens here in Marco Polo episode 6. It is still a serious drama. There is still serious intent in the storytelling, but there is wit in the performances and in the characterization and in this particular element of the story. And it's been deliberately sort of sprinkled in now, maybe because Lucarotti felt they needed a different dynamic 6 episodes in of a 7-parter, maybe just because he liked the joke, but it certainly it helps, and it's a contrast to much that has gone before. It's pretty much a new element and a new tone this late in the story, which I think it needs. So I'm going for the sort of comedy / the wit / the deliberately sort of contrasting depiction of Kublai Khan in terms of what we were led to expect and what history tells us. Jeremy Bentham will probably choose something like he's going to choose something. Well, no, let's see. I was going to say he's probably going to choose something very correct and proper, like the BBC production schedule or something, because he's methodical and he's smart and he's clever, and he didn't say or interesting like I do, to the extent that I do. Anyway, Jeremy Bentham on Mighty Kublai Khan.
I mentioned at the beginning how mesmerised I was at first reading the scripts for Marco Polo. And I don't just mean mesmerised purely by the physical quality of the scripts, which was remarkable in itself, in that they are one of the few Doctor Who scripts that's actually composed and printed on foolscap paper, which, for the benefit of youngsters among us, it was a style of paper that preceded A4. It was narrower than A4, but also longer, which made it incredibly tortuous when I got permission to be allowed a copy of the script for personal research purposes, because they had to write little notes in at the bottom of certain pages to make sure the information that was missing from the photocopier could appear on my copies of it. No, the remarkable thing about the scripts for Polo is there's so much in it these days that you couldn't do nowadays in a children's or even a family viewing programme. There's big sections on drug abuse in the 500 Eyes episode. The whole concept of Ping Cho being trafficked to be married to a 75-year-old man who then expires when he takes a Chinese version of Viagra to make sure he could do the deed when required. It's all pretty subversive stuff for a 5:15 programme on BBC television. The lovely thing about Luca Rossi's script, though, is that it also includes comedy. Not obvious comedy, but certainly when you get to this episode, Mighty Kublai Khan, where you finally know you're going to meet the object of the episode's title, Mighty Kublai Khan. You're expecting some Arnold Schwarzenegger or General Xerxes figure to come striding into this enormous, great, tall palace. Instead, the doors open and out toddles, bent over double, little Martin Miller, absolutely weighed down by his arthritis and looking very much the antithesis of a mighty ruler of the world. And of course the comedy there is that he's flanked by the quite voluminous Claire Davenport as the Empress, and it's just visually amusing in the way that it's constructed, and you can see why William Hartnell, when he was talking about Marco Polo, said he enjoyed the comedy moments in this story, and probably Mighty Kublai Khan is the most amusing of all of the episodes of this epic serial. So I'm commending the scripts as my special reason for pointing out a high point of this episode.
Now, listen up, everybody. I was slightly worried then. Having said he was going to choose the production, what was it? I said the production schedule. I was slightly worried he was then going to say, I'm going to choose the fact that the scripts are on foolscap paper. And then I'd have gone, there's no chance I'd have gone. But then he mentioned the comedy, but he's rounded that up as the scripts, as the whole thing. Do I get half a point? Go on. Let me at least bask. Can you bask in a shadow? No, you're shaded in a shadow, aren't you? You don't bask in a shadow unless it's a shadow that has nourishing and regenerative properties. Maybe Jeremy's shadow is sunlight and scholasticism, so I'm going to bask in his shadow. You do bask in a shadow, but that seems counterintuitive when shadows are mostly dark and hide you from the sun. Yeah, what's the sun anyway? I'm basking in his shadow. And I to get half a point because he pointed out that specifically this episode it was the comedy and the Kublai Khan and all of that. And I think probably the only time in any of my podcasts where General Xerxes will be invoked. So I'm delighted by that. And I also like the fact that Jeremy likes all things you wouldn't be allowed to do today with and it's very true, the drugs and yes, that we'll come to Ping Cho's partner to be in episode 7. We haven't got to that yet. But yes, and indeed, I mentioned that too in earlier episodes with the stabbings, which were much more de rigueur in 1964 than they would be now. And those things are of interest to note, if from an historical point of view, where we go, things that they do differently then for reasons that were perfectly understandable to them, that we now look at and go, oh yeah, well, but we wouldn't do that now. And some, yes, we are very pleased about, but then some, like trusting the audience to be intelligent and taking your time with certain things, and certainly, I think, being a little bit more rigorous about sort of intellectual ideas and stuff, are things that we've lost, that one rather laments. And I think what I love about Doctor Who is I don't think it's a children's program. Well, we know, we have this. It's what we tell people, isn't it? It's never made by the children's department; it was made by the drama department. But it is a kids show. You're first drawn to it when you're a kid, because I think Doctor Who is a program that is suitable for children, if not being, when it's written down to children. Any children's program that's written down to children commits a sin. But Doctor Who in particular, I think it has to be aware of the children. You don't have anything overtly sexual in it, and I think it's a bit embarrassing when it does. Although then, when in Androids of Tara, Peter Jeffrey goes, I showed Madame Lamia a certain courtesy. As a grown-up, you go, oh, that's a sexual reference in Doctor Who. I rather like that. So actually, you can have that if you do it sparingly and with wit and restraint. Oh, that's a word we don't hear enough these days. God, I'm turning into a right old Puritan. But I think Doctor Who is at its best when it's mindful of the child audience. So the writers then have to restrict themselves, much in the same way that the visualizers of Doctor Who have to restrict themselves because of its comparatively low budget, so that it has to use its imagination rather than special effects sometimes. Doctor Who's writers have to use their imagination beyond what you just show to an adult, because you have to sometimes be a little bit squeamish about some things because that there is a child audience there. And like the lack of special effects or the low budget being a breeder of invention, which I think is to Doctor Who's advantage, because necessity is the mother of invention, and invention makes for a more interesting experience. Exactly the same with Doctor Who, because the writers have to write something that is suitable for children, is acceptable children's viewing, but is also something that entertains adults without adults having to make too many compromises, which is why so many adults watch Doctor Who and fewer watch Button Moon or Teabag or whatever. I'd say Doctor Who is a children's program that adults adore, as Gerard Garrett of the Daily Sketch said, and that there are certain kids shows I watch, but in the back of my mind it's that these are kids shows. Whereas with Doctor Who, I don't feel I'm watching a kids show, but maybe my psychology is wrapped up in that. So it's interesting to view what was acceptable in a kids show then and what wouldn't be acceptable now, and some of the things that we do now that actually wouldn't be acceptable then, and some show progress, some do not. Some just show that things are different sometimes, and that is just interesting. I find it all interesting, which is why looking back on the history of Doctor Who can be instructive and thought-provoking and just plain enjoyable, and that's why we do it. Marco Polo shows many of these aspects just as much, if not more, than many others. And having such an insightful companion along for the ride as Jeremy Bentham has made me think about those things even more. And you too, I hope. And I hope they've helped you to enjoy a story that doesn't have spaceships or monsters or a lot of the traditional trappings of Who as we understand it today, but is still definitely and and in many of its key elements, very much a Doctor Who story, and actually a really good one at that. So thank you for viewing and listening, and let's see what happens when somebody admits an assassin to Peking. Not going to be very good news for somebody. Until next time, Take care. Thank you very much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, J. Jeremy Bentham. I'm grateful to him and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include David Spofford and David Gillespie, who are not the same person, Jonathan Molyneux, Kevin Murdoch, Stephen, Chris Stokes, Kevin West, Michael Herbert, Dr. Gary Thomas, C.M., Andrew Larson, Jeff Edwards, Steve Cunniff, Jace Mayo, Chris Williams, Luke Atkins, Pete Adamson, John Arnold, Kevin Ashelford, James Bell, David Bickley, Will Brooks, Rick Byatt, Gary Byrne, Robin Bland, Alex Kafajoglu, Paul Carnahan, Andy Case, John Curley, Mark Dakin, John Elledge, Sam Estirem, Gary Gillett, James Gould, Lisa C. Greco, David Green, Fraser Gregory, Paul Gregory and Dave Hoskin. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to become a patron, then you would know what it's like to wait for the release of the latest episode. As I record this, I normally release episodes for patrons at 1 minute past midnight. This episode was due to be released 15 minutes ago. I mean, look, it's not, I don't guarantee it, but it's just what people are used to. So I'm not breaking any laws. I'm not in breach of contract. However, I'm recording this now as my other half sleeps, and I have to say occasionally makes a snoring noise, but I think I'm insulated enough from that to spare her blushes. To record this slightly sotto voce and in the dark, because she's fallen asleep in front of the Swedish drama that we're watching, which is called Before We Die. So I had to wait until after she'd fallen asleep fully to record this, and then whack it out for patrons who pay from £3 per month, and they get bonus material, they get extra releases, they get advance releases. So they are listening to this, six months in advance of you lot. So even if it is 15 minutes late, it's 6 months minus 15 minutes before you've got it. The Happy Times and Places at least 6 months in advance, and they get monthly AMAs, and there are other things as the tiers go above the £3, but most things are available at the lowest tier, because I don't like withholding things really, but the nature of the beast is that you have to lure people up the ladder, so I do it with the odd trinket, but you get pretty much everything essential at the lowest tier, and you can even get a 10% discount on that if you go for a year in advance. You can also do the Ko-fi option, which doesn't tie you into a monthly payment. It doesn't get you any of the bonuses, unfortunately, but it is a way of you to, to help support these financially and to keep them ad-free. I mean, I'll be honest with you, unless I'm, really in dire straits, I won't be putting adverts on this, but throwing me the odd copper justifies my decision to do that, rather than have me not do it on a point of principle and feel foolish. But look, I know times are tough, and I know it's not very becoming to hold out my hand, so I hold out my hand mostly in friendship and gratitude that you listen to this stuff. But if you enjoy it, and I hope you do, I'm always happy to receive feedback if you say it nicely. But also, if you could go on all the social medias and make nice noises about these, and if you could give them a 5-star rating everywhere you can, it really helps to get the word out there about these, and to leave some nice lines of review. That really helps to get other people to notice these and listen to them and hopefully like them as well. And if you're outside of the UK and you have Doctor Who fan friends who might not have had these, thrown in their direction, please throw away, chuck them into their yard, because I'd like to reach out across the world with the positive message of how much fun there is to be had mining Doctor Who's past and being cheerful about its future. So any help in that regard is hugely appreciated. And those key addresses are patreon.com/Toby Hadoke and kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. Thank you. Oh, yeah, and there's social media. These are on Twitter, at Hadoke Podcasts, Hadoke is how you spell my surname. Well, it's how I spell it. I wish everybody else would. I'm on Twitter at Toby Hadoke. My comedy club, XS Malarkey, is on Twitter too, at XS Malarkey. That's an X, that's an S. Malarkey. There doesn't seem to be a massive yoke in the Venn diagram of people who like my comedy and people who like my Doctor Who witterings, although I try and cross-fertilise each with both. But, XS Malarkey is just a nice comedy club every Tuesday in Manchester at 8 p.m. Please do tell your friends about it. And we do a monthly show on Twitch the first Sunday of every month. When we can. We've had a few blips lately. But whenever you go up there, there's an archive of performances from when we were forced online during the plague, but we turned that to our advantage by getting acts from all over the world to do their best into their computer screens at home whilst all our doors were locked and the pandemic raged outside. And we got some brilliant acts, multinational, international acts of all different kinds to show, how great and interesting and healthy and inventive the comedy circuit is, and I truly believe it is, and I work at its grassroots, all of the time, and I'm pleased to spread the word about that as well. Live comedy, you can't beat it. Although, given the choice between live comedy and watching the returned episodes of Marco Polo, I might temporarily rescind that statement, or at least put it on hold, or do what most people do and pretend I never said it ever and double down when people confront me with the evidence. Welcome to the modern world. One episode left, Assassin at Peking. Now, I've seen pictures of a film can that had Assassin at Peking on it. Did one of those turn up? I don't think it was one of the ones that was a fake. I think the film can turned up and something else was in it. I haven't alluded to it. I've done the commentary for Assassin at Peking. I record the closing credits and whatever this rubbish is sometimes after I've done the commentaries for the episodes for reasons that are too boring to go into. So I haven't mentioned the film can, but so I mention it here just because it might be a reminder to people. Go, oh yeah, I've seen those pictures. I think the story was behind it was that it turned up in Australia and had nothing in it. But I also know there are film cans that have been fakes that have turned up now and again, because some people who've got nothing better to do think that faking the possibility of a missing episode turning up is presumably better than whatever it is else they might be able to do when they're on their own. Takes all sorts, I guess. Some people would say this is a colossal waste of everybody's time, so who am I to judge? But I think the Assassin at Peking one, I don't know. Go and look it up. This isn't about facts. This is scraps of. I think you get a few facts, don't you? But this bit shouldn't even exist. This bit, unlike Marco Polo, shouldn't exist. This bit is way beyond. We're at 52 minutes according to my ticker here for a podcast that was designed to be 25 minutes with a little bit at the beginning and a little bit at the end. So I'm really stretching this out to the crack of doom. Maybe if I stop doing these bits that shouldn't exist, that will leave space for stuff that should exist, and I'll magic Marco Polo back into existence. So maybe I should stop doing these post-credit things. But I know some of you listen, and you see, just by giving me a little bit of a positive about... Well, you don't even give a positive. You say, I listened to the end, which is lovely. Any feedback, of course. I'm like a moth to the flame for the positivity, because I'm pathetic. Anyway, look... Stop listening to me. Go and find Marco Polo. I want to see it. Bring me back. Bring me the head. Bring me the film can of Assassin at Peking, but this time with something in it. And if you do it in the next 48 hours, I'll be able to comment along to the actual episode rather than the soundtrack and reconstruction, which is what I've done for the next release. But as I say, it's not due out for patrons for another 48 hours. So that's how long you've got. Yeah, because patrons, did I mention, they get 3 releases a week? They get Monday. I mean, they haven't got this one yet, and they should have done, but that's a technicality. And then they get Wednesday, and then they get Friday, and on Tuesday they get a picture of my dog. So if you're not a patron, what the hell are you doing? Again, if you're looking for Marco Polo, you're forgiven. No, you're forgiven anyway. Thanks for listening. But if you're listening this far, do go and see seek professional help.